organisations.
Hugh Henry, I'm the member of the Scottish Parliament for Renfrewshire South, and I've recently been appointed as the convener of the Welfare Reform Committee in the Scottish Parliament.
My name is Peter Kelly and I'm Director of the Poverty Alliance.
I'm Steve Fothergill. I'm a Professor at Sheffiled Hallam University, and we've done 4 reports for the Scottish Parliament on the impact of welfare reform here in Scotland.
From the third sector's perspective is that welfare reform and the direction of travel we're seeing from the UK government has been a devastating one.
The biggest problems, I think, for many of my constituents certainly, are going to be the changes to the tax credit system. It's going to leave many working families, people who are striving to better themselves, it's going to leave them substantially worse off. I know many people are becoming worried about how they will feed and clothe their families. It will impact hugely on their living standards.
It's hard for us to identify positive outcomes when the scale of change has been so significant, when the level of cuts to people's individual incomes has been so significant. The research that we've heard about today from Sheffield Hallam underpins the really quite devastating impact that this has had on many individuals' incomes. And as an organisation dealing with people day in and day out who are experiencing welfare reform, it's very hard to see what the positives are at this point.
We estimate that the pre-2015 reforms, so that's everything before the new round announced by George Osborne in the July budget, the pre-2015 reforms are taking out about £1.5 billion a year from people's pockets here in Scotland. That's equivalent to £450 for every adult of working age in the whole of Scotland. That's not every adult claiming benefit, but that's averaging the hit across the entire population between the age of 16 and 64. So this is a very, very substantial financial change.
And the figures that Sheffield Hallam have shows the massive impact it's had. There's nothing positive about this in terms of the impact on families. What has come out of it though in Scotland is the beginning of a new debate about social security. We have the narrative at UK level which has the idea of skivers versus strivers, people who are in benefits basically, have been told they're worth nothing. But in Scotland, hopefully what we're seeing, I think, and that's a positive I think from all of this, is actually a new focus on what social security is for, that it's positive, that actually this is the mark of a civilised society, that when people are down and out, or are struggling, or for example cannot work due to this disability, that society supports them.
It's worrying that those in the margins of our society are going to be the ones that will be asked to make the biggest contribution to balance our books.
We looked very carefully in our research to see whether the welfare reforms were delivering the higher levels of employment and lower levels of unemployment that they are said to be able to deliver. At least they're said to be able to deliver by the Westminster government. I've got to say the conclusion when we look at the labour market data is that it's very hard to detect any positive impacts of the welfare reforms on labour market variables up here in Scotland. So if there is an impact, it is simply on saving the Treasury in London money. It's not about actually creating more employment and less unemployment up here.
The sanction regime, that's one of the things that people speak to us about over and over again. People talk to us about the way that conditionality has increased in the social security system, and I think we need a system that's based far more on trust, on people's capability to engage in labour market programmes when they can, rather than one that thinks that by forcing people into programmes that they will achieve positive outcomes. That hasn't been the experience for us.
What we're seeing consistently, the work done by David Webster at Glasgow Uni, which has been incredibly important, is that sanctions are devastating people's lives. People are losing benefits for often no reason at all. But we're seeing families who are pushed to crisis point. There are some people who have been sanctioned for up to 3 years, which means no income for 3 years or little income. All the evidence showed us that the bulk of the cuts are focused on those who are disabled, who are sick for a range of reasons. We have the transfer to employment support allowance, which has seen the work capability assessment, which the evidence has shown consistently it's not fit for purpose. We have cuts to disability benefits. There's a lack of recognition of the additional costs that disability can bring to people's lives.
Is there anything that the Scottish Government can do to mitigate the impact of these cuts and reforms?
Well, we already have taken some steps. For example, we took some steps to mitigate the worst effects of the bedroom tax, and it's profoundly disappointing that we haven't been able to see the abolition of the bedroom tax at a UK level. We took some steps to support councils to help with welfare funds to help some of the poorest families. So yeah, there will be more that we can do once we have the powers. The challenge will be on firstly how we decide to fund it, and secondly whether we retain the budget at the present level or whether we make cuts to it. And of course we will need to make some principled decisions about what the fundamentals are that underlie any new welfare system.
So we need to carry on doing some of what we have been doing. That's things like the Scottish Welfare Fund, that's ensuring that we mitigate the impact of the bedroom tax and so on. But I think one of the things that struck us is the role of the community and voluntary sector. So as further rounds of cuts start to come from the UK government to Scotland, I think we need to put pressure on the Scottish Government to ensure that they continue to support the community and voluntary sector.
Well, to be fair to the Scottish Government, they've been ahead of the game, and they are looking to mitigate, for example, the bedroom tax. We've seen some work to leave a safety net through the Scottish Welfare Fund, which gives some people some crisis support. There's been support for charities who are in the front line. My concern, I think, now is the further £12 billion cuts that are to come, and what we do around that, because there's a limited budget. And to be fair to the Scottish Government and to others local authorities, there's a limit to what we can do around that. So my call would be to the Scottish Government to pull together all the interested parties into a summit, and relatively soon to say how do we prepare for these cuts, because these are going to be much more devastating than Glasgow.
The welfare reforms don't impact evenly across the United Kingdom. And when you roll all the reforms together, there are really three types of areas across Britain as a whole that are in the firing line. One are the older industrial areas in England, Wales and up here in Scotland. Two are some seaside towns, not so much up here in Scotland. But three are a number of London boroughs as well. But within Scotland, I mean, that does mean, for example, that Glasgow and some of its surrounding older industrial districts, are hit significantly harder than the UK average and harder than the average in Scotland as a whole. Whereas other areas, Aberdeenshire, which is doing rather nicely, thank you very much, escapes rather lightly from these reforms. Just like Surrey and Berkshire and Hertfordshire and Buckinghamshire and the nice bits of southern England also escape rather lightly. Perhaps the single most surprising thing that's come out of the research is realising just how much of the impact is falling on families with dependent children. Somehow that's got under the radar. There's been a lot of emphasis on, for example, the impact on the sick and disabled, and that is certainly non-negligible. But when you roll together the impact of several different reforms, and people are just hit, are hit not by a single reform, but often, from 3 or 4 different directions by different elements of the package, it is really quite astonishing as to how much of that burden is falling on families with dependent children.
It's hard to see where the positives are in this when we see so many tales of individual hardship. You could look at what the UK government is saying officially, but as far as I can see, it's simply an attempt to cut public expenditure rather than look at making people like myself, who are relatively well paid, make an additional contribution to society. They have decided that the burden should fall on those least able to afford it. So I think it's just a cost-saving exercise with no thought whatsoever to the individual consequence or hardship to the poorest sections of society.